The desert night settled over the Afghan village like a heavy, suffocating blanket. A low wind whispered through the narrow streets, carrying with it the faint scent of dust, smoke, and cooking fires long extinguished. SEAL Team 7 had been moving for hours, navigating a labyrinth of mud brick homes, shuttered windows, and crumbling walls. The mission had been simple in theory: infiltrate, secure the target, extract the local informant, and get out before anyone even realized they were there. In practice, however, the village had an eerie stillness that screamed danger. Lieutenant Harris led the team, a man whose calm demeanor masked a mind constantly analyzing every detail. He crouched low, boots stirring small clouds of dust, eyes sweeping for motion, ears straining for the slightest sound of life. Behind him, the men followed in disciplined silence, rifles ready, night vision goggles painting the scene in ghostly green. Each footstep was calculated, each movement measured against the risk of exposure. The courtyard they approached was wide, open, and deceptively empty, a death trap in the making. Harris signaled the team to halt. The courtyard lay ahead, partially illuminated by the moonlight bouncing off cracked walls. In its center, a lone well jutted from the dirt, and surrounding it were low crates, broken furniture, and scattered debris. It should have been simple: cross, clear, and continue. But Harris's gut tightened. Something felt off, a vibration beneath his skin that told him they were being watched. He motioned for a scout to advance slowly, crawling along the edge of the courtyard toward the nearest wall. The scout hadn't gone 10 feet before chaos erupted. Bullets slammed into the stone and wood around them, sparks and splinters flying in all directions. The courtyard, once eerily silent, became a roaring chamber of death. Tracer rounds traced the path of fire from hidden windows, rooftops, and even between the tightly clustered houses. The SEALs were trapped in open ground, every step forward a potential death sentence. Harris shouted orders, trying to coordinate a response, but the enemy had them completely surrounded. Dust and smoke filled the night, catching in the teams, lungs and stinging their eyes. They dove for cover behind crates, walls, anything that could absorb a bullet. Private First Class Daniels pressed against a wall, firing blindly at the flashes of movement in the shadows. Another SEAL, Ramirez, tried to return fire from a corner, but each round seemed to provoke more aggression. Harris pressed his hand to his radio, attempting to call in support, but the static answered him, crackling and broken, giving nothing in return. For the first time in years of combat, Harris felt the raw, suffocating weight of vulnerability. The SEALs were trained to expect danger, but nothing had prepared them for this sudden, almost theatrical ambush. It wasn't just the number of enemy fighters, it was the precision. Every bullet, every movement of the enemy, suggested they had watched this village like a hawk, waiting for a moment like this. Harris scanned the rooftops, the windows, the shadows between the walls. And then he saw it, a glimmer of steel reflecting moonlight, too far for his rifle, too small to be a mistake. Meanwhile, high above the village, a figure crouched on a ridge overlooking the courtyard. She was far from the chaos, but intimately tied to it. Corporal Emma Grant adjusted her night vision scope, scanning the courtyard with methodical precision. Her training had drilled into her the importance of patience, observation, and perfect timing. Hours ago, she had taken position on the ridge, her rifle camouflaged against the rough terrain, ready to cover the SEALs. She had anticipated potential threats, studied the layouts of the buildings, memorized the angles of fire. But nothing could prepare her for the moment that had just unfolded. From her vantage point, the SEALs were tiny figures under a storm of bullets. Harris and his team dove behind crates and walls, returning fire whenever possible, but they were pinned, and the enemy knew it. Emma's pulse quickened, but her face remained a mask of calm. She exhaled slowly, adjusting the scope, counting the enemy positions, calculating trajectories, wind speed, and distance. Her fingers hovered over the trigger, ready to open the door that could save the trapped team. Inside the courtyard, Harris barked orders. Move left. Cover each other. But his voice was almost lost amid the cacophony. Bullets chipped the walls, kicked up clouds of dust, and tore through the air with shrill whistles. The team moved in bursts, using what little cover existed. One SEAL tried to drag a wounded comrade to safety, but another sniper's head popped above a rooftop, forcing him back. Harris cursed under his breath, knowing that without covering fire, any attempt to advance was suicide. Every passing second felt like an eternity. Emma's eyes scanned the courtyard, her training merging with instinct. She saw the SEALs, the positions of their attackers, the trajectories of bullets in midair. Her scope locked onto a fighter preparing to lob a grenade toward the SEALs. Time seemed to slow. She exhaled, squeezed the trigger, and her first shot echoed across the valley. The enemy soldier dropped instantly, the grenade falling harmlessly to the ground. One precise action, and the tide of battle began to turn. Harris noticed immediately a sudden shift in the enemy's behavior. The hesitation, the scramble to find cover, something had changed. He couldn't see her yet, but he knew someone was supporting them. Relief, cautious and fleeting, surged through him. The SEALs adjusted, moving in tighter formations, trying to capitalize on the opening. Daniels fired with renewed confidence, picking targets with more accuracy. Ramirez shifted to provide suppressive fire. The courtyard was still dangerous, but hope flickered in the chaos. Emma continued her watch from the ridge. One by one, she eliminated threats, her shots precise, calculated, and deliberate. Each action carved a path for the SEALs below. She became an unseen force, a guardian angel hidden in the shadows. Her body was tense, muscles coiled like springs, yet her mind was perfectly still. Every calculation mattered. Every shot counted. And she knew that the lives of the men in that courtyard depended on her every decision. Minutes stretched, a battle of wills, precision, and survival. The SEALs were alive because of her presence, but the fight was far from over. Harris moved his team, covering wounded comrades, advancing toward the next stage of their mission, while Emma provided the deadly shield from above. The night seemed endless, the courtyard a crucible of fire and smoke, but the first step had been taken. The opening was there, a crack in the enemy's armor, and it had been carved by a single perfect shot. The village, once a silent trap, was now a battlefield, alive with motion, strategy, and tension. Harris knew this was just the beginning. The SEALs were trapped, but not defeated. And somewhere high on the ridge, a Marine sniper had shifted the balance with nothing but her rifle, her focus, and her resolve. The story of that night, the night the SEAL team was trapped in the courtyard and saved by a single shot from above, was only beginning to unfold. Emma's finger hovered over the trigger as she scanned the courtyard below. The SEALs were a handful of shadows darting between crates and walls, but the enemy's positions were lethal. Roof lines bristled with rifles, windows framed dark figures ready to fire, and the entire courtyard had become a kill zone. Every second the SEALs remained exposed, the risk multiplied. Her breath was steady, but adrenaline coursed through her veins, sharpening her focus. She knew that one precise shot could save lives, but one miscalculation could doom them all. The first target she identified was a rooftop sniper at the far end of the courtyard. He was crouched low, scanning the open space, and appeared ready to take out the SEAL moving with a wounded comrade. Emma adjusted her scope, factoring in the distance, wind, and elevation. The moonlight reflected faintly off his rifle barrel, giving her the angle she needed. She exhaled, aligned the crosshairs, and squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, echoing across the valley like thunder. The sniper collapsed instantly. Down below, Lieutenant Harris noticed the change. The enemy faltered, confusion rippling through their ranks. One SEAL whispered, "Who's covering us?" But there was no time to speculate. Bullets still flew, but the rhythm had shifted. Emma scanned for the next threat. Another figure emerged. From a doorway, raising a rifle to aim at Daniels. Without hesitation, she fired. The enemy went down, and the courtyard became slightly less hostile, the opening growing. Harris seized the moment. "Move! Move! Cover each other!" he shouted, signaling the team to advance. The SEALs scrambled behind debris, dragging their wounded comrades. Dust kicked up around their boots, masking their movement. Each step was measured, but the tension was palpable. The enemy recovered from the initial shock and began to fire again, forcing the SEALs to hug cover tightly. But Emma's shots were relentless, precise, and timely, each one creating a corridor of safety, however narrow. Private Daniels was pinned against a crumbling wall, sweat running down his face, heart hammering. He peeked around the corner and spotted a fighter preparing to throw a grenade. The seconds felt like hours. Before he could warn anyone, a rifle crack rang out, and the grenade fell harmlessly to the ground. Daniels barely had time to process what had happened. Someone was saving them from above. His team pressed forward cautiously, using every inch of cover as bullets whizzed past. Emma's eyes never left the courtyard. She shifted slightly to avoid detection, moving along the ridge to get a better angle. She spotted another threat, a man crawling toward a crate that sheltered a SEAL. He was almost undetectable in the shadows, but Emma's scope found him. She fired. Another body dropped silently into the dust. Every shot she took was deliberate, calculated, and purposeful. Her presence above had become a lifeline. Without her, the SEALs wouldn't have lasted more than a few minutes in the courtyard. Lieutenant Harris realized the team's window of opportunity was opening, but it was still narrow. He signaled his point man to drag the wounded toward the next wall, while providing covering fire. Bullets pinged off walls, kicked up dust, and sprayed dangerously close to his boots. Harris's mind raced with calculations. The next 15 seconds would determine whether his men lived or died. Keep moving. Keep moving, he barked, pushing his adrenaline-fueled team forward. Each SEAL pressed against the dirt and debris, hoping for a clean path, hoping the unseen guardian above would hold the line. Emma's pulse was steady. Her training had conditioned her to act under extreme stress, but nothing compared to watching, and men below exposed to relentless fire. She saw a fighter aiming at Ramirez, ready to fire from a second-story window. Emma adjusted her elevation and windage, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger. The enemy collapsed. Ramirez spotted the shot and yelled, "That's our angel up there." His words barely carried over the roar of gunfire, but the sentiment was clear. Someone was watching, protecting, and precise. The courtyard wasn't clear yet. There were still shadows moving in the rubble, still rifles trained on the SEALs, still danger in every corner. Emma scanned quickly, locating another enemy attempting to flank the left side. She fired. Another body fell. Harris gave the order to push toward the alley on the north side of the courtyard, a narrow escape path partially covered by debris. The SEALs surged forward, bullets spraying past them. But the sniper on the ridge above neutralized enough of the threats to allow incremental movement. Ramirez moved first, dragging a wounded teammate, while Daniels provided suppressive fire. Harris followed, signaling for the remaining men to stay low and coordinated. Emma shifted along the ridge again, repositioning to maintain a clear line of sight. She adjusted her breathing, scanning for targets and firing only when necessary. Each shot was a shield. Each body she took down a step toward survival. The SEALs began to gain ground, moving from cover to cover, inching toward the alleyway that might lead them out of this nightmare. Suddenly, a flash of movement from a side window caught Emma's attention. A fighter had crept to a vantage point. That threatened the team's escape. Her scope locked onto him, and she fired. The man dropped instantly, his rifle clattering to the ground. Below, the SEALs recognized the pattern. Every shot from above corresponded perfectly to the dangers. In the courtyard, Harris's radio crackled with static, but he knew what he had to do. "We're moving. On your cover, move," he commanded. Time slowed for everyone in the courtyard. Bullets screamed past, dust swirled, and the faint glow of the moon highlighted the silhouettes of men in motion. The wounded were carried. Crates became temporary shields, and walls provided precious seconds. Emma continued her calculated barrage from the ridge, each shot designed not to kill indiscriminately, but to create a corridor, a path, a chance for the SEALs to survive. Her focus was absolute, unbroken by the chaos around her. Minutes felt like hours. The SEALs had moved halfway across the courtyard, the enemy slowly retreating in confusion and fear. Harris motioned for the final push toward the narrow alley. Daniels crawled over a broken wall. Ramirez covered him, and the wounded were carried with gritted determination. Emma's rifle cracked repeatedly, suppressing anyone who dared rise against them. The night had become a deadly chessboard, and she was controlling the game from above, with a precision unmatched by anyone below. By the time the SEALs reached the alley, the courtyard was still a battlefield, but they had made it halfway. Harris turned, peering upward toward the ridge. Though he couldn't see her, his mind raced. Someone had changed the entire dynamic of this fight. He realized then that survival had a single guardian. Every SEAL, every breath they took, had been bought with careful, measured shots fired from above by a Marine sniper whose identity was still a mystery. Emma watched the team move toward the alley, her body tense and coiled, ready to react at any second. The enemy had begun to regroup, trying to flank the team from the left, but her position on the ridge allowed her to intercept every attempt. She adjusted for the distance and the elevation, her eyes sharp and unwavering. The SEAL's extraction depended on her. One missed shot could mean death, but her resolve didn't waver. She fired again, neutralizing the threat. Harris finally gave the signal to pause, using the alleyway as temporary cover. The SEALs were battered, bruised, and exhausted, but they were alive. The weight of what had just occurred pressed on them. One wrong move, 1 second too long in the open, and they would have been casualties. Emma's shots had turned the tide. Without her, there was no way the SEALs would have survived the initial ambush. Relief and gratitude mixed with adrenaline as they assessed the situation. The night was far from over, but the first major hurdle had been overcome. The SEALs regrouped, tending to the wounded, checking their ammunition, and planning the next phase of their mission. Harris's eyes scanned the ridge, wishing he could see the sniper responsible for their salvation. Somewhere above, hidden in darkness, Emma prepared for the next stage, knowing her role was far from finished. The courtyard had been a trap, but she had opened a way, and the story of survival was only beginning. The courtyard remained a storm of chaos, even after Emma's first shots had bought the SEALs precious seconds. Dust and smoke swirled around the men as they pressed forward, bodies low, rifles poised. Lieutenant Harris signaled his team, urging them to maintain tight formations while dragging the wounded behind the partial cover of crates and broken walls. Every step was calculated, every move measured against the possibility of death. The SEALs had crossed the first stage, but the enemy was far from defeated, and the narrow alley that promised escape was still hundreds of feet away. Ramirez moved ahead, scanning rooftops and windows for snipers. His experience in urban combat told him that every movement had to be synchronized with covering fire. One mistake could be catastrophic. Daniels followed, crouching low, dragging Private First Class Taylor, who had taken a grazing bullet to the arm. Harris's heart raced as he checked the perimeter, aware that each second exposed them to fire from multiple directions. Emma's presence on the ridge was their only real advantage. Each shot from her rifle disrupted enemy positions and forced them into cover. Emma's scope tracked every movement, every shadow. She saw a fighter attempting to rise above a crate, too. Take a clear shot at Harris. A split-second decision later, and he fell, rifle clattering to the ground. Her eyes never wavered. She adjusted for the wind that gusted through the courtyard, recalculating trajectories. Every bullet had a purpose: protect the seals, clear a path, and maintain the delicate balance of life and death below. She wasn't just providing support, she was dictating the flow of battle, unseen, unacknowledged, yet indispensable. Harris motioned the team forward again. The alley was within reach, but the enemy had anticipated their path. A second wave of fighters emerged from side streets, armed with rifles and grenades. The SEALs were forced to split their attention, alternating suppressive fire and forward movement. Daniels fired in short, controlled bursts, covering Ramirez. As he dragged Taylor over broken debris, bullets pinged off stone walls, dust kicked up in clouds, and shouts echoed through the night. Harris's mind worked at lightning speed, calculating angles, distances, and the positions of both friend and foe. Emma spotted a group attempting to flank the SEALs from the left. She adjusted her elevation and windage, exhaled slowly, and fired 3 precise shots. Each enemy dropped, unable to fire, unable to threaten the team. Below, Harris saw the pattern forming. Every time the SEALs needed an opening, someone above created it. He barked orders, moving the men in short bursts, using crates and walls as temporary shields. The courtyard, once a trap, was slowly turning into a corridor of survival. The SEALs pressed on, inching toward the alley. The wounded were supported, ammunition checked, every movement synchronized. But the enemy was relentless. A fighter emerged from a rooftop, taking aim at Ramirez. Emma's crosshairs followed instantly, her shot precise. The man dropped without a sound, his rifle useless. Another enemy fired a burst toward Daniels. Emma's second shot cracked through the night, neutralizing the threat before it could strike. The SEALs began to recognize the rhythm. Emma's bullets were orchestrating their movement, turning impossible odds into a narrow path forward. Harris's heart pounded as he saw the alley close in. It was partially blocked by rubble, but it offered cover and potentially freedom. He signaled for the SEALs to split, some moving left, others right, creating overlapping fields of suppressive fire while the wounded were dragged toward safety. Each SEAL moved with tense precision, aware that even a single misstep could cost lives. Emma's presence above was both a reassurance and a silent reminder of how thin their margin for error had become. Suddenly, a grenade landed near the center of the courtyard. Harris shouted warnings, diving low and shielding the wounded. The explosion ripped through the dust, sending fragments of debris flying. Daniels and Ramirez pressed forward, covering their comrades while ducking behind walls. Emma's eyes tracked the impact site. She fired at a man, attempting to lob a second grenade, hitting him squarely. The projectile fell harmlessly into the dirt. Every moment Emma held her position and fired accurately meant more lives saved below. Every shot a lifeline in the chaos. The enemy adjusted, realizing that direct engagement was being thwarted by an unseen sniper. They began to reposition, attempting to funnel the SEALs into a tighter kill zone closer to the alley. Harris recognized the tactic instantly. Spread out, keep moving, and maintain fire, he ordered, guiding the team through a gauntlet of bullets, debris, and chaos. The SEALs moved in short, coordinated bursts, bullets from the enemy whizzing past, threatening but never striking. Emma's covering fire created gaps, however small, and the team took advantage of every one. Dust and smoke hung thick in the eye, air swirling around the team like a living entity. The courtyard was a blur of movement, shadow, and sound. Harris checked each man, ensuring they stayed low, stayed silent when necessary, and fired when critical. Private First Class Taylor groaned, wounded but alive, dragging himself forward under Daniel's guidance. Ramirez fired from behind partial cover, his eyes darting to every angle. The SEALs were performing a deadly dance, synchronized with the bullets raining down from above, their survival dependent on Emma's precision. Emma's eyes were sharp, unblinking, scanning for the smallest hints of enemy movement. She repositioned along the ridge, careful to maintain sight lines while avoiding exposure. She saw a fighter attempting to scale a wall for a better angle, and fired. The man dropped, collapsing into the dust. Another emerged from the shadows. Of a rooftop, another shot. Another life prevented from ending prematurely. Her breathing remained steady, her pulse a metronome in the chaos. Below, Harris's team had moved halfway to the alley, inch by inch, thanks to her covering fire. Time seemed to distort. Seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. The SEALs' adrenaline surged, driving them forward while exhaustion threatened to slow their movements. Harris's voice echoed in brief bursts of commands, guiding each step, each movement, each calculated risk. Bullets splintered walls, kicked up dust, and pinged dangerously close. Emma's shots continued to open paths, neutralizing threats before they could strike. The team was still vulnerable, but they were moving, and movement meant hope. Finally, the SEALs reached the point where the alley narrowed. They paused briefly, using the walls for cover, catching their breath, checking ammunition, and tending to wounds. Harris looked upward, imagining the sniper who had been their invisible guardian. Whoever she was, she had transformed the courtyard from a death trap into a corridor of survival. "Keep pushing," Harris whispered. "We're almost there." Emma, hidden above, adjusted her scope, ready for the next threat, knowing the most dangerous moments might still be ahead. The enemy was disoriented, realizing that their ambush had been partially nullified. They regrouped, attempting to reposition and strike from new angles. But Emma anticipated every movement, neutralizing threats before they could act. Harris signaled for a final push. The team surged forward, crossing the last portion of the courtyard toward the alley. Bullets whizzed past, some striking close enough to kick up dust around their boots, but each step brought them closer to survival. Emma's precise shots remained the invisible hand guiding their path. The alleyway finally loomed ahead, a narrow ribbon of relative safety compared to the open kill box they had just traversed. Harris counted his men, all alive, all breathing, all shaken but intact. The SEALs had crossed the courtyard under extreme fire, saved by the unseen sniper who had turned a near-certain disaster into a chance at survival. Emma remained on the ridge, vigilant, scanning for any remaining threats, understanding that their journey was far from over. But for now, the courtyard, once a trap, had been conquered. A narrow alley stretched ahead like a jagged vein, carved into the village. The walls on either side were fractured mud brick, pockmarked with bullets and scarred by explosions. Moonlight filtered in sporadically, illuminating broken crates, discarded shoes, and the occasional splintered door. Lieutenant Harris signaled the team to proceed cautiously, one step at a time. The wounded had to be carried, ammunition checked, and every corner scanned. The courtyard behind them had been a crucible, but the alley presented new dangers. Ambushes could strike from above or around corners. They weren't out of the fight yet. Ramirez led the first group, moving low, scanning rooftops and windows. His eyes flicked from shadow to shadow, calculating distances, possible firing angles, and points of cover. Daniels flanked the wounded Taylor, steadying him while keeping an eye on potential threats. The men were tense, muscles coiled like springs, adrenaline fueling every move. Harris followed, coordinating each step, monitoring every side street, and keeping track of the positions of his team members. The alley, though narrower than the courtyard, offered some cover, but it also meant that the enemy could anticipate their path and strike from both sides. High above, Emma maintained her vigil on the ridge. The moonlight glinted off her scope as she adjusted her position, carefully scanning for movement. The SEALs had made it out of the courtyard thanks to her precision, but she knew this was just the beginning. Reinforcements were almost certainly en route, and the enemy's desperation would only increase. Her finger hovered over the trigger, poised for immediate action. One wrong calculation could mean disaster. Each shot she fired was meant to carve a path, not just kill, and the weight of responsibility pressed heavily against her shoulders. The SEALs reached the midpoint of the alley when movement flared above them. A rooftop gunner had positioned himself to take a clear shot at Harris. Without hesitation, Emma fired. The man dropped silently into the shadows. Below, Harris noticed the instant shift in enemy behavior. The alley wasn't safe yet, but the sniper above was orchestrating their path with terrifying precision. Harris barked quick orders, signaling his team to move in short, controlled bursts, alternating suppressive fire with forward movement. Each step forward was a gamble, and the SEALs were acutely aware of it. Daniels caught sight of a figure emerging from a side doorway, rifle raised, aiming at Taylor. He yelled, firing a short burst, but the man ducked, disappearing from view. Emma's crosshairs found the target instantly. One precise shot, and the threat was eliminated. Taylor's breathing steadied slightly, as Daniels gave him a reassuring nod. Ramirez covered the other side, eliminating movement as needed. Every shot from Emma created a breathing space in the chaos below, allowing the SEALs to inch closer to their goal. Survival had become a carefully timed dance, each movement dependent on the sniper's deadly rhythm. Halfway through the alley, the team encountered a fresh obstacle. A collapsed wall blocked their path, creating a tight bottleneck. Harris quickly assessed the situation. "We go left," he said, pointing to a narrow opening between two buildings. Daniels and Ramirez helped drag Taylor through the gap while Harris covered their flank. The enemy had already begun repositioning, attempting to funnel the SEALs into a confined kill zone. Emma anticipated their moves, tracking each shadow, calculating angles, and taking shots that neutralized any immediate threats. Her rifle was their invisible shield, the key to the team's survival. A sudden burst of gunfire rang from the far end of the alley. Harris ducked low, signaling the team to hit the ground. Bullets struck the walls, kicking up dust and fragments. Emma adjusted her scope, finding the shooter on a balcony above a partially collapsed house. Her breathing steady. She fired. The enemy crumpled into the rubble, his rifle falling uselessly to the ground. Harris took the opportunity to push forward, the SEALs moving in tight coordination, using walls and debris as temporary shields. They were still exposed, but the sniper above continued to carve a path through the chaos. The wounded Taylor gritted, his teeth, sweat streaking his dusty face. "Almost there," Daniels whispered, dragging him forward. Ramirez suppressed fire from a higher vantage, while Harris coordinated their movement. Each step was deliberate, measured against the constant threat of enemy fire. The alley was a gauntlet, and every passing moment intensified the risk. Emma's presence above was a lifeline. Her precise shots had not only eliminated immediate threats, but also prevented the enemy from establishing a killing formation. The SEAL's survival depended entirely on her unseen hand. Suddenly, the sound of movement echoed from a side doorway. Harris froze, signaling the team to hold position. 2 enemy fighters emerged, attempting to cut off the SEAL's escape. Before they could raise their rifles, Emma fired. Both men dropped, their bodies tumbling into the shadows. The SEALs moved quickly, keeping low and using the alley's limited cover. Dust swirled around them, stinging eyes and choking lungs, but the path forward remained open. Emma adjusted her position along the ridge, scanning for additional threats, knowing that even a single missed enemy could jeopardize the team. As the team pressed deeper into the alley, Harris noticed a faint glimmer of movement on the rooftops above. The enemy was attempting to regroup, positioning snipers and riflemen for the next phase of the ambush. Harris clenched his jaw. "Keep moving. Don't give them a shot," he barked. Daniels and Ramirez kept the wounded Taylor moving, alternating fire with careful glances at the rooftops. Emma tracked every shadow, taking calculated shots that disrupted enemy formations. Her presence allowed the SEALs to maintain momentum, a critical advantage in the deadly choreography unfolding below. Halfway to the alley's exit, another threat emerged, a fighter raising a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. Harris saw it, shouted a warning, and ducked behind cover. The SEALs hit the ground, but the blast would have been catastrophic if not for Emma. She shifted her scope, adjusted for distance and elevation, and fired. The launcher clattered to the ground harmlessly, the threat neutralized. Relief surged through the team, but there was no time to celebrate. The alley was still a dangerous gauntlet, and the enemy's desperation would only escalate as they pressed forward. Daniels gritted his teeth as he dragged Taylor over a pile of rubble, each step a battle against gravity, exhaustion, and fear. Ramirez covered him, firing at any movement along the rooftops. Harris moved with precise coordination, ensuring the team's formation remained intact. Emma's shots continued to dictate the rhythm of their advance. One by one, she eliminated threats before they could act, creating small pockets of safety in the chaos. Every moment she held her position meant more lives saved below, a shield that could not be seen, but whose impact was undeniable. Finally, the SEALs reached the end of the alley. The narrow passage opened onto a small courtyard, partially covered by debris and the remnants of a collapsed roof. Harris quickly assessed the situation. The team had made it through the gauntlet, but enemy forces were regrouping for another push. Emma repositioned along the ridge, scanning for movement. Her presence had been the difference between life and death, and she knew the next phase would be even more critical. The SEALs had survived the alley, but the battle was far from over. Harris's team paused briefly to catch their breath, tend to wounds, and reload. The night was far from over, and the enemy was still a lethal presence. The SEALs were battered, exhausted, and tense, but they were alive. Emma's sharpshooting had turned the tide, transforming a near-impossible survival scenario into a narrow corridor of hope. Each step they had taken had been orchestrated by her unseen hand, a guardian angel whose precision had saved lives and allowed them to press forward. The small courtyard ahead was their next challenge, but the team was ready. Harris looked upward, imagining the sniper who had guided them this far. He didn't know her identity, but he understood her importance. Without her, the alley would have been their tomb. The SEALs regrouped, each man breathing heavily, muscles coiled with tension, ready for the next stage. Emma adjusted her scope one final time, preparing to cover their movement as they crossed the courtyard ahead. The story of survival was still unfolding, and the sniper on the ridge was the unseen hand holding it together. The courtyard ahead was deceptively quiet, but Lieutenant Harris knew better. Years of combat experience had taught him that silence often meant ambush. The narrow alley had offered temporary refuge, but this open space was more dangerous than the first courtyard they had survived. Broken walls, shattered crates, and remnants of mud brick homes littered the ground, providing minimal cover. Harris signaled his team to move cautiously, weapons raised, eyes scanning for even the faintest signs of movement. Behind them, the alleyway had funneled them like prey, and the enemy would anticipate their next steps. Ramirez moved first, crouching low, scanning rooftops, windows, and doorways. Daniels flanked the wounded Taylor, dragging him along as carefully as possible. The SEALs had learned quickly that every movement had to be deliberate. One misstep could draw fire from unseen enemy positions, and the team could be annihilated in seconds. Harris kept his own weapon raised, eyes flicking to every angle, calculating the safest path while maintaining momentum. The courtyard ahead was a battlefield, a deadly gauntlet that demanded both precision and courage. High above, Emma adjusted her position on the ridge. Moonlight highlighted the contours of her rifle as she scanned the courtyard, crosshairs fixed on movement. Her heart beat steadily, her breath controlled. Every shot mattered. Every round could save a life. She had already neutralized multiple threats below, but she knew the enemy would adapt quickly. Reinforcements would arrive, and the SEAL's margin for error was narrow. One miscalculated shot or delayed reaction could cost them all. She exhaled, locked on a rooftop sniper preparing to fire, and squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, and the enemy collapsed silently. Harris noticed the change instantly. The sniper's hesitation signaled an opening. Move forward!" he shouted, guiding his team towards scattered crates, offering partial cover. Daniels and Ramirez advanced carefully, dragging Taylor behind them. Each step was calculated, timed between bursts of enemy fire. Dust kicked up around their boots, mixing with the metallic scent of spent cartridges and gunpowder. The SEALs pressed forward, hearts pounding, muscles taut, every breath measured. Survival depended on timing, skill, and the invisible force. Guiding them from above, the enemy responded aggressively. A group of fighters emerged from the far end of the courtyard, weapons raised, attempting to cut off the SEALs' escape. Harris signaled a defensive line, but the SEALs were vulnerable in the open ground. Emma's crosshairs locked on the threat instantly. One by one, she neutralized them with precision. Each shot a lifeline for the men below. The team moved in. Short, coordinated bursts, alternating suppressive fire with forward movement. The courtyard, once a death trap, was gradually becoming a path to survival. Daniels dragged Taylor toward a partially collapsed wall, keeping low and scanning for sniper fire. Ramirez fired suppressive shots at any movement in the shadows, forcing the enemy into cover. Harris coordinated the team's advance, monitoring both the wounded and the perimeter. Each SEAL moved with tense precision, aware that exposure even for a second could be fatal. Emma's presence above was a constant reassurance, an unseen guardian controlling the rhythm of the battle. Every precise shot she fired opened another inch of safe passage through the courtyard. Suddenly, a flash of movement caught Emma's attention. A fighter had climbed to a second-story window, rifle aimed directly at Harris. Her finger squeezed the trigger, and the man dropped instantly, rifle falling uselessly to the ground. Below, Harris signaled the team to advance. They moved in bursts, using crates, walls, and rubble for cover. Bullets cracked around them, dust kicked up in clouds, but Emma's sharpshooting continued to create pockets of safety. Each step forward was earned, a delicate balance of courage, timing, and deadly precision. The SEALs pressed further, reaching the central area of the courtyard. The wounded tailor groaned under Daniel's support, sweat streaking his dusty face. Harris shouted orders, keeping the men coordinated, suppressing the enemy wherever possible. Emma's scope followed every shadow, every rooftop movement. A group of fighters attempted to flank from the left, but her shots cut them down before they could aim. The SEALs advanced steadily, inching toward the extraction point. Each bullet from above bought them a few vital seconds, a chance to survive the deadly courtyard. An RPG launcher suddenly appeared at the far end of the courtyard. Harris caught sight of it and shouted a warning. The team dove for cover instinctively. The weapon was raised, aimed at the center of the SEALs' formation. Emma's eyes narrowed. She adjusted for distance, wind, and elevation, exhaled, and fired. The launcher dropped harmlessly to the dirt before it could be fired. Harris felt a rush of relief, but there was no time to celebrate. The enemy was still dangerous, and the SEALs had to maintain focus as they pushed toward the extraction zone. The team moved with precision, weaving through rubble and broken walls, each step measured. Daniels and Ramirez flanked the wounded, providing suppressive fire whenever possible. Harris directed the team, moving behind cover while assessing enemy positions. Bullets cracked around them, ricocheting off walls and crates. Emma's shots above neutralized immediate threats, allowing the SEALs to advance incrementally. Her presence was the difference between survival and catastrophe. Every enemy eliminated, every shot placed, carved a path toward freedom for the men below. As they neared the extraction point, Harris noticed enemy reinforcements moving into the village from a side street. Their numbers were growing, and the team could not afford to linger. "Keep moving, almost there," he shouted, urging the SEALs forward. Daniels fired bursts at any movement, while Ramirez suppressed threats from above. Taylor, wounded but alive, pressed on, each step a testament to his determination. Emma tracked every enemy movement from the ridge, ensuring that no one could strike from above or behind. The courtyard's far end was now visible. The extraction zone, partially cleared by air support and prior reconnaissance, awaited. Harris signaled the team to make the final push. The SEALs sprinted low, bullets snapping around them, dust and debris rising in clouds. Emma's rifle cracked in rhythm, neutralizing the last few threats. Every precise shot bought critical seconds, allowing the SEALs to close the gap to safety. Their coordinated movement, under relentless fire, was a ballet of survival, choreographed by experience, discipline, and the unseen guardian above. Finally, the SEALs reached the extraction point. The area was secured by temporary air support and cleared debris, allowing the helicopter to land. Harris and his men scrambled aboard, dragging the wounded, firing back as necessary, and maintaining coordination until the last moment. Emma stayed on the ridge until the final man was safely aboard, scanning for any remaining threats. Her last few shots cleared the perimeter, neutralizing fighters attempting one last desperate strike. Only then did she lower her rifle, exhausted, blood and sweat streaking her face. The rotor wash of the helicopter stirred the night air, dust and debris whipping violently around the courtyard. Harris watched as the last SEALs scrambled aboard, including the wounded Taylor. Relief, exhaustion, and gratitude surged through him. "That shot opened the way," he said quietly into the radio, knowing exactly who had saved his team. Emma exhaled, lowering her scope, adrenaline still racing. The SEALs had survived what should have been a death trap, thanks to her precise, calculated, and fearless sharpshooting from the ridge above. The helicopter lifted off, carrying the exhausted, battered SEAL team away from the village. Below, the courtyard remained a war zone, the enemy regrouping and scanning for any remaining threats. Harris looked down toward the ridge, imagining the sniper who had orchestrated their survival. He didn't know her name, but he knew her importance. Emma's actions had not only saved lives, but had turned a near-impossible situation into a narrow corridor of hope. The mission was far from over, but the team was alive, and the first victory of the night had been claimed. The rotor wash of the helicopter whipped dust and debris across the courtyard, creating a swirling cloud that obscured vision. Harris knew that even at the extraction point, they were far from safe. The enemy was regrouping, and reinforcements were moving in from side streets. Every second mattered. The SEALs scrambled toward the waiting helicopter, dragging the wounded and firing sporadically at shadows that moved too close. The landing zone was chaotic, but it was their only chance to escape the village alive. Harris checked his team quickly. Daniels supported the wounded Taylor, while Ramirez provided suppressive fire along the perimeter. Each man moved with precise coordination, instincts sharpened by countless drills and real combat experience. Harris's eyes scanned for threats, noting flashes of movement in doorways, windows, and rooftops. Enemy fighters had realized the SEALs' likely exit route and were attempting to cut them off before the helicopter could lift. Every second counted. Every action had to be deliberate. High above, Emma adjusted her position on the ridge. The moonlight reflected off the scope, illuminating the grim determination etched on her face. Her eyes scanned the courtyard and rooftops for any sign of enemy activity. Bullets kicked up dust around the SEALs below, but she tracked each movement with precision. One miscalculation could mean death for the team she was covering. She exhaled slowly, keeping her finger poised over the trigger, ready to neutralize any threat before it could strike. The first sign of trouble came from a rooftop on the far side of the courtyard. A sniper had taken position, rifle aimed directly at Harris as he dragged Taylor toward the helicopter. Emma tracked the shadow, calculating distance and wind in an instant. She fired. The sniper fell silently, rifle clattering against the roof. Harris noticed the sudden silence and signaled the team forward. Bullets still flew from other positions, but the immediate threat was neutralized. The SEALs pressed on, moving in bursts, using crates and walls as temporary cover. A sudden explosion rocked the courtyard. A grenade had been thrown near the helicopter's landing zone. Harris dove low, shouting warnings to his team. Daniels shielded Taylor as the fragments tore through dust and debris. Emma's eyes locked on the attacker, attempting to lob another grenade. One shot, precise and controlled, dropped the man before he could strike. The projectile landed harmlessly in the dirt. Every second Emma held her position allowed the SEALs to survive the chaos below. Each shot was measured, purposeful, and life-saving. Harris motioned for the team to move forward. The helicopter was close, but the final stretch of the courtyard was the most exposed. Bullets zipped around them, and enemy fighters had begun to concentrate their fire in hopes of preventing the extraction. Ramirez provided suppressive fire, targeting muzzle flashes on rooftops, while Daniels kept Taylor moving. Harris led from the middle, eyes scanning constantly for new threats. The SEALs were tense, muscles coiled, every step calculated to maximize survival while minimizing exposure. Emma's scope tracked a group, attempting to flank the SEALs from the left. She fired 3 shots in quick succession. Each enemy collapsed silently into the dust. Below, Harris noticed the effect immediately. The team had breathing space to advance, moving closer to the helicopter. The sniper on the ridge had become the invisible hand shaping the battlefield. Every calculated shot cleared the way, forced the enemy into cover, and bought the SEALs critical seconds. Without her, the courtyard would have been their tomb. The helicopter hovered low, rotors kicking up waves of dust, debris, and loose rubble. Harris shouted for the team to keep moving. Daniels and Ramirez flanked Taylor, keeping him low and shielded. Harris himself ducked behind a partially collapsed wall, firing at enemy fighters trying to engage the team. Emma continued her covering fire from the ridge, taking out anyone attempting to rise above cover or fire from hidden positions. The SEALs were now within 50 feet of the extraction point, but danger was still deadly close. Suddenly, another RPG was raised from a rooftop near the far edge of the courtyard. Harris shouted a warning, and the SEALs hit the ground instinctively. The weapon was trained on the center of their formation, capable of devastating destruction. Emma, tracking the launcher, adjusted for distance and elevation and fired. The shot hit precisely, sending the RPG clattering harmlessly to the ground. Relief surged through the SEALs, but there was no time to relax. Reinforcements were still moving into the village, and the extraction was far from guaranteed. Daniels gritted his teeth, dragging Taylor forward through the final stretch. Ramirez fired suppressive shots at enemy positions as Harris coordinated. The team's movement. Bullets cracked around them, ricocheting off walls, kicking up dust, and filling the air with tension. Emma's shots continued to dictate the rhythm of the SEALs' advance. One by one, enemy fighters attempting to engage were neutralized before they could act. Each precise shot from her rifle was a shield, giving the SEALs a fighting chance to reach the helicopter safely. As they neared the landing zone, Harris realized the enemy had anticipated their likely exit route and was attempting one final ambush. Fighters emerged from side streets and rooftops, weapons raised and aimed with deadly intent. Harris barked orders, the team moving in coordinated bursts to minimize exposure while advancing toward the helicopter. Emma's eyes tracked every movement. Her fingers squeezed the trigger repeatedly, each shot eliminating immediate threats, buying the SEALs crucial seconds. The air was thick with gunfire, dust, and adrenaline, but the team pressed on, inching toward survival. The final few meters were the most perilous. Harris shouted over the roar of the helicopter rotors, signaling the team to sprint. Bullets tore through the air around them, some striking dangerously close, kicking up clouds of dust. Daniels carried Taylor with renewed effort, muscles screaming, while Ramirez provided covering fire to suppress enemy movement. Emma's final shots from the ridge neutralized any last-minute threats, ensuring the team could reach the helicopter without further casualties. Every life saved was a testament to her skill, courage, and precision. Finally, the SEALs reached the helicopter. Harris helped Daniels lift Taylor aboard, followed by the rest of the team. They scrambled inside, firing as necessary, while the helicopter's rotors created chaos in the courtyard. Emma stayed on the ridge until the last man was safely aboard, scanning for any remaining threats. Her last shots eliminated fighters attempting one final desperate strike. Only when the helicopter lifted off did she allow herself to lower the rifle, exhausted, blood and sweat streaking her face. The SEALs exhaled collectively as the helicopter rose into the night sky. The extraction was complete, and the team had survived what should have been a death trap. Harris looked at the ridge, imagining the sniper who had orchestrated their survival. He didn't know her identity, but he knew her importance. Emma's sharpshooting had transformed an almost impossible mission into a narrow corridor of hope. The team had survived, and the first critical stage of their extraction was complete. Even as the helicopter gained altitude, the team remained tense. They were battered, wounded, and exhausted, but alive. Harris checked every member of the team, ensuring no one had been left behind. Daniels and Ramirez supported Taylor, who had endured both injury and terror with courage. The rotor wash tossed dust, debris, and tension into the night air, a chaotic reminder that survival was never guaranteed. Emma, hidden on the ridge, took one final glance at the courtyard she had saved the seals from, ensuring no remaining threats could interfere with the extraction. The night was far from over, but for the seals, a major victory had been achieved. They were alive, intact, and on their way out of the village. Emma's role as the unseen protector had been decisive. Without her calculated, precise, and fearless sniper fire, the mission would have ended in catastrophe. Harris, sitting aboard the helicopter, finally allowed himself a moment to breathe, to feel the weight of survival. The seals had escaped. The courtyard and the ridge above held the silent figure whose shot had opened the way. The helicopter lifted off unevenly, rotor wash tossing clouds of dust, debris, and fragments of shattered walls into the night air. Harris gripped the edge of the door, eyes scanning the courtyard below. Bullets cracked against the fuselage, splintering the ground beneath them. Enemy fighters, frustrated at the failed ambush, had shifted their positions, aiming at the departing aircraft. The SEALs inside the helicopter stayed low, weapons ready, hearts hammering with tension. The extraction was underway, but the danger had not yet passed. Daniels kept his arm tight around the wounded tailor, whose breathing was shallow but steady. Ramirez leaned forward, scanning the open ground and nearby rooftops for threats, firing as necessary. Harris's eyes darted from one shadow to another, coordinating defensive fire while ensuring the helicopter maintained a steady ascent. Every movement was critical. The SEALs had survived the courtyard and alley, but enemy fire still threatened their escape. The rotor wash made it difficult to see, the night air filled with dust, smoke, and the scent of gunpowder. High above, Emma repositioned herself along the ridge, moving silently across rocks and ledges to maintain a line of sight on the courtyard. Her scope tracked every enemy movement, every fighter attempting to follow or fire at the helicopter. Her finger was poised over the trigger, ready to neutralize any threat. The SEAL's safety now depended as much on her skill as on the pilot's ability to maneuver. She exhaled slowly, keeping her breathing controlled despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. A flash of movement drew her attention. A fighter attempting to climb the remaining walls toward a rooftop position. Emma fired without hesitation. A man fell, rifle clattering against the rubble. Below, Harris noted the suppression, giving the helicopter a slightly safer path. Daniels and Ramirez took advantage of the brief lull to check on Taylor, ensuring he remained secure. Every second Emma kept the enemy pinned, increased their odds of escaping the village alive. The SEALs had already endured the impossible once. Survival now demanded vigilance, coordination, and flawless execution. The helicopter began to gain altitude, but the enemy was not finished. Rifle fire followed them, tracer rounds streaking through the night. Harris directed Daniels and Ramirez to provide suppressive fire through the open side door, keeping pressure on enemies attempting to line up shots. The SEALs moved in concert with the helicopter's ascent, timing bursts of return fire to maximize both offense and defense. Emma, observing from the ridge, picked off anyone attempting to take aim or pursue the helicopter. Her shots were surgical, removing threats without unnecessary risk. The pilot banked the helicopter slightly to avoid concentrated fire from the rooftops, the blades slicing through the smoky night air. Bullets ricocheted off nearby walls and shattered the edges of doors, but none struck the aircraft. Harris shouted orders over the rotor roar, ensuring the team stayed coordinated. Daniels kept Taylor supported, who groaned quietly but remained conscious. Ramirez continued to scan the surroundings, taking occasional shots to suppress enemy movement. The helicopter rose, but the fight was not over. Enemy snipers had already begun moving along alternate ridges, trying to predict the SEAL's flight path. Emma's eyes tracked a group attempting to flank the ridge, moving parallel to the helicopter's ascent. She fired 3 quick, precise shots. The enemy collapsed silently into the shadows. Below, Harris saw the result immediately. The helicopter gained a few critical seconds free of concentrated fire. Every shot Emma took was the difference between life and death. The SEALs had survived ambushes in courtyards, alleyways, and rooftops, but extraction under fire required perfection. Emma provided it. Each bullet she placed was a lifeline, a guardian invisible to the men she had already saved. A sudden flare of light illuminated the courtyard. An enemy had ignited a tracer flare to signal their positions. Harris pressed down, ducking low, signaling the SEALs to stay close and fire sparingly. Daniels adjusted his hold on Taylor, who was now too weak to move independently. Ramirez took careful shots at figures illuminated by the flare, while Harris coordinated the team's defensive efforts. Emma's scope locked on the source of the flare, and a single shot dropped the enemy operative before he could raise another. An immediate threat vanished, giving the helicopter a slightly safer path. Despite the temporary relief, more reinforcements had appeared from side streets, weapons raised, firing toward the helicopter. Harris shouted for Daniels and Ramirez to suppress fire while he focused on keeping the team safe. Taylor groaned, clutching his arm, but remained conscious. The helicopter pilot maneuvered aggressively, banking sharply, blades slicing the night air as bullets whizzed past. Emma tracked the reinforcements, neutralizing threats methodically, keeping the corridor above the courtyard clear for the SEALs. Escape. Every shot was calculated, deliberate, and essential. The helicopter began to ascend above the rooftops, giving the SEALs a better angle of safety. Harris's mind raced. Extraction was still precarious. Enemy snipers could have predicted. Their path, and RPGs or rifles, could destroy the aircraft in seconds. Daniels continued supporting Taylor, firing sporadically when targets presented themselves. Ramirez provided suppressive fire as bullets ricocheted off debris below. Emma, hidden on the ridge, adjusted her aim repeatedly, ensuring that every enemy attempting to follow or intercept the helicopter was eliminated. Her precision was their shield, their lifeline, and their guardian. The courtyard, once a trap, now appeared increasingly distant beneath the helicopter. The team moved as one, low and coordinated, firing only when necessary. Harris checked every member of the SEAL team. All accounted for, all breathing, all holding together despite exhaustion. Tracer fire from rooftops flared intermittently, but Emma neutralized the threats before they could strike. The helicopter gained altitude steadily, the ground falling away, dust, debris, and sparks flying up in the rotor wash. The tension in the team's muscles began to ease slightly, but vigilance remained paramount. Suddenly, a fighter raised an RPG from a distant rooftop, aiming for the helicopter. Harris shouted a warning. The SEALs hit the floor instinctively. Emma tracked the weapon, calculated distance, and fired. The RPG dropped harmlessly to the ground, the enemy operator incapacitated. Relief surged, but there was no time to relax. Enemy forces still lurked, searching for a weak point. Harris, Daniels, and Ramirez maintained suppressive fire as the helicopter banked sharply to the right, avoiding predictable angles. Emma repositioned along the ridge, continuing her cover until the last possible second. Finally, the helicopter cleared the village perimeter, gaining altitude and speed. Below, the enemy regrouped in the courtyard, frustrated and unable to halt the SEALs' extraction. Harris allowed himself to exhale slightly, glancing at the team. They were battered, wounded, exhausted, but alive. Daniels adjusted his hold on Taylor, who gave a faint, tired nod. Ramirez slumped against a seat, scanning the horizon for any potential pursuit. Emma remained unseen, a guardian above, ensuring that their extraction was unchallenged by remaining forces below. The rotor wash kicked up the last clouds of dust and debris, and the courtyard began to fade beneath them. Harris looked toward the ridge where Emma had fired relentlessly to secure their survival. Though he couldn't see her, he knew she had changed the course of the mission. Her sharpshooting had turned near-certain disaster into survival. Every shot had been precise, deliberate, and life-saving. The SEALs were now airborne, out of immediate danger, and moving toward safety. The battle for the village was ending, not with complete destruction, but with the lives of the men preserved. As the helicopter gained altitude, the team finally allowed themselves to exhale. The SEALs had survived every obstacle, ambushes. In courtyards, alleyways, RPG threats, sniper fire, and enemy reinforcements. Harris looked out the side door at the village fading into darkness, grateful for the unseen hand that had guided them to this point. Emma's presence on the ridge had been decisive. Without her precise, calculated, and fearless sniper fire, the team would not have survived. The extraction was complete, and the first wave of danger was over, but the memory of the night would linger indefinitely. The helicopter finally leveled out, climbing above the jagged ridges that had framed the night's battle. The village below was a patchwork of smoke, dust, and shattered walls, silent now, except for the faint echoes of distant gunfire fading into the night. Inside the cabin, the SEALs slumped in exhaustion, adrenaline slowly giving way to fatigue. Harris looked around at his team. Daniel sat next to Taylor, whose bandaged arm hung limply. Ramirez checked ammunition and weapons, and the others were breathing heavily, but alive. Against all odds, they had survived the mission. The roar of the rotor blades filled the cabin, masking the quiet murmurs of relief and whispered gratitude among the team. Harris's gaze drifted toward the ridge, where they had first seen the flashes of Emma's rifle fire. The memory of that single shot. That had opened the courtyard, the alley, and ultimately the extraction route remained vivid. Without that shot, they would have been pinned, cut down in seconds, and the mission could have ended in catastrophe. Emma had been their invisible lifeline, and now, finally, Harris wondered who she really was. Daniels leaned back, glancing at Taylor. "He's going to be fine," he said softly, though both men were weary beyond words. The tension, the fear, and the hours of fighting had left their marks, but the knowledge that they were alive brought a fragile comfort. Ramirez checked his rifle one last time, scanning the horizon for any lingering threats. Harris exhaled, knowing that the mission had demanded everything of them, testing courage, skill, and trust under extreme pressure. And yet they had survived. The invisible hand above had ensured it. Harris finally spoke into the comms, his voice calm but steady. "Command, extraction complete. Team intact, wounded accounted for. We owe our lives to an unknown sniper on the ridge. I repeat, team intact." The response crackled back, acknowledging their survival and congratulating them on maintaining composure under fire. Harris allowed himself a moment of reflection, thinking about every calculated movement, every risk, every shot from Emma that had allowed them to advance inch by inch, step by step, through the deadly courtyard and alley. Minutes passed in a tense but quiet vigil as the helicopter carried them away from the village. Daniels finally broke the silence, his voice soft but tinged with awe. "I can't believe we made it through that courtyard alive. Those shots, she saved us all." Ramirez nodded, eyes still scanning, muscles tense from hours of combat. Taylor gave a weak thumbs up, trying to smile despite pain. Harris leaned back, realizing the team's survival was not just a matter of skill and strategy. It had been guided by a single, unseen sniper whose accuracy and courage had tipped the balance. The helicopter banked over a ridge, and Harris caught a glimpse of movement far below. Emma was still there, hidden in the shadows, rifle slung across her back. Her posture was relaxed now, but there was a quiet intensity in her eyes. Harris radioed the pilot to hover briefly, giving him a chance to speak directly. "Who are you?" he asked into the open air, voice carrying across the distance. Emma's lips curved in a faint, knowing smile, but she remained silent. She nodded once, acknowledging the gratitude, before disappearing back into the ridge's shadows. Her identity remained a mystery, but the impact of her actions could not be denied. Inside the cabin, the SEALs allowed themselves to finally exhale. The tension that had held them taut for hours began to dissolve into the fatigue and relief of survival. Harris checked on each member of the team personally, ensuring that wounds were tended to, that everyone was breathing steadily, and that no one had been left behind. The helicopter hummed steadily beneath them, rising above the ridges, carrying them toward safety and away from the chaos of the village. The impossible gauntlet they had survived: the courtyard, the alley, the ambushes, and RPG threats was now behind them. Taylor, supported by Daniels, finally allowed himself to speak, voice hoarse from exertion. That one shot, saved us all," he murmured. Harris nodded, thinking of the ridge above, of the calm, calculated precision that had made survival possible. Ramirez added, "We owe her more than we can ever repay. Whoever she is, she's the reason we're alive." The SEALs shared a quiet moment, the helicopter's steady hum filling the silence between words. Survival had been a team effort, but Emma's intervention had been decisive. As the helicopter crossed a ridge and the village fell behind, Harris reflected on the lessons of the night. Courage alone was not enough. Precision, patience, and the willingness to act decisively under pressure were what determined the outcome. Emma had embodied all of these qualities. She had not hesitated, she had calculated every shot, and she had created a path through impossible odds. The SEALs owed her their lives, and even in her anonymity, her heroism was undeniable. Survival had demanded every ounce of discipline, every shred of courage, and her unseen hand had guided them to victory. Hours later, back at a safe military base, the SEALs disembarked from the helicopter, exhausted but alive. Taylor was taken immediately for medical attention, Daniels walking beside him in support. Ramirez secured their equipment, scanning the perimeter one last time out of habit. Harris remained quiet for a moment, replaying the events in his mind. The courtyard ambush, the alleyway, the RPG, the sniper on the ridge, every step and shot that had allowed them to survive. And then he remembered Emma, the figure whose presence had been the difference between life and death. Command debriefing followed, recounting the mission's details, including enemy resistance, ambush strategies, and the SEALs' survival. Harris emphasized the critical role of the unknown sniper, describing the precision and courage that had saved the team. Though her identity remained a mystery, her heroism was acknowledged. Each team member recounted moments where her actions had changed the tide of survival, reinforcing the impact of that single, decisive intervention. Without her, the mission could have ended in tragedy. As night gave way to early morning light, Harris found himself reflecting quietly on the ridge above the village. The sky was pale, the chaos of combat replaced by calm. Somewhere up there, Emma had remained vigilant, ensuring the SEALs' survival until the last possible moment. She had become the guardian of the team, her actions defining the outcome of a battle that could easily have claimed their lives. Harris allowed himself a rare smile, grateful for skill, courage, and the unseen protector whose single shot had opened the way. Though Emma remained a mystery, the impact of her intervention would never be forgotten. The SEALs had survived against impossible odds, their lives preserved by one person's deadly precision and unwavering courage. Harris looked around at his team, battered but alive, and knew that survival was not just a matter of luck, but of discipline, skill, and unseen allies willing to act decisively. Emma had become the unseen hero, the rifle on the ridge, the shot that had turned a death trap into salvation. Finally, as the base settled into routine, the SEALs found a quiet moment to honor the invisible hand that had guided them. Harris, Daniels, and Ramirez exchanged glances, each silently acknowledging the courage and precision that had saved their lives. The story of the mission would be told, the events of the night recorded, but Emma's identity remained a secret. Yet her actions had ensured the survival of a team trapped in a courtyard under impossible odds. And in that truth, her heroism was eternal. As the sun rose, painting the horizon with soft light, the SEALs understood the lesson the night had imparted. Survival depended on courage, precision, and the willingness to act when it mattered most. They owed their lives to a sniper whose presence they could never forget, whose single shot had opened the way, and whose anonymity ensured the story would remain as much legend as truth. Emma had been the unseen hand that guided them through death to life, and her mark on their lives would endure forever.